And we have our guest with us today, Mauro. Thank
Pleasure
you for
is
joining.
mine.
Yeah, I'm glad you. I keep messing up your last name, so I'm
Chiesa.
Chiesa.
Yes.
Yes.
Church in Italian.
Oh.
Church in Italian.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And we met almost.
Some time ago.
Yeah, you
Almost
were.
10 years ago.
Yeah, you were speaking at CIM.
Yes.
And you had good information, and you weren't afraid to give your opinion.
Oh my God. No. So say it isn't so.
And so when I was coming up with
That's what's been running. I was wondering what was wrong with my delivery.
well,
I keep on speaking my mind.
yeah, as long as it's the truth. And when I saw you speaking, you had good information backing up what you were saying.
Yes.
And here at this show, we want real facts and real information.
Well,
We're trying not to get people to hold back.
It's
So
very good because the industry is in a turnaround.
Mhm.
And just as long as the industry keeps on learning from past mistakes, I think it's in for a good future.
This episode here, we're talking about how to get mines off the ground. Now, within the show, we've talked about technology, we've talked about funding, we've talked about transitioning with new technology, challenges in the industry. We had Mr. Shapitka. He's an MLA up in the East Kootenays. So we talked about the government's role. We covered a lot of ground. At the end of the day, the mine has to
Get going.
get going.
Yeah.
And so you've worked with a lot of mining companies in getting them going, and you have quite a background. So I first of all, can we talk a little bit about your background, where you come from?
Sure. First of all, I worked with EDC in Ottawa for 4 years. Then I went to Banque Indosuez for 7 in New York City. Then I worked with Sumitomo Bank out of New York City as well, and did Candelaria and a few other mining projects. And then I went to the World Bank for 10 years. And then I retired about 10 years ago, and now I just look at mining projects on a selective basis. I just turned 65 2 days ago, so I've been told to slow down by my doctor.
Well, happy belated
Yes,
birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you.
We would, if I had known that, we would have had a little
Yeah,
little
a
cake.
little cake.
Oh, what the... Yeah.
Especially
We should've-
Gowdy.
yes,
Gowdy loves
I-
to throw her birthday parties.
I do.
So we'll document it. We'll know by next year.
Yeah, okay.
I'll go in a little bit more into so your roles with the banks. What were they? With the World Bank?
No, basically, in the World Bank, it was advisory because that was the 95 to 2005 period. And all of a sudden, with the fall of the Iron Curtain, all sorts of new opportunities came up, and all the yield curve began to drop. So with low cost of funding and new markets, you found yourself with a kind of a whole new market situation. Up until early 1990s, the Iron Curtain and vicious cycles basically created a boom-bust cycle. With the advent of Brazil, Russia, India, and China in the mid-90s, all of a sudden a new super cycle came in and the cost of funds dropped. So all of a sudden you had all sorts of new countries that were all of a sudden vying to get their mining activities going. But for one reason or another, their permits, their legal framework was well behind. So I worked for 10 years advising countries on how to get their legal frameworks going. And in one case, Mozambique, we actually helped them sell their coal deposits for a one-time development fee to Vale. So it still involved transaction advisory, but it involved basically getting mining laws up to world-class standards. And unfortunately, Canada's fallen a little bit behind, mainly because Canada at one time was at the forefront. And, unfortunately, when you're at the forefront, your subsequent generations keep on thinking that they're at the forefront. And in the meantime, other countries have catapulted over us. And now we find ourselves a bit in a catch-up mode.
Yeah. Well, to be frank, one of the things that I just kind of tweaked to when you said that is looking around at the show. I'd say average age is probably 50 plus. You don't
Yes.
have an influx of youth getting, and it is a great industry for innovation and technology, but I'm not seeing a lot of youth
Well,
involved.
that's just it. Mining used to be the place where, wow, if you struck it, you found gold. Wow, precious metal. Silver, another precious. Nowadays, the fast money, the easy money, is found in high tech, in social media, and in numerous other applications. So mining actually has to compete now,
Right.
not only for personnel, but also for capital with these new industries. Because, in 1995, there was no Google, there was no Facebook, there was no Amazon. Now, all of a sudden, these three companies represent 40% of New York Stock Exchange, and they are worth gazillions. And this is what mining must compete with, unfortunately. And yes, I too noticed the demographic, and I think, only time will tell. Only time will tell.
One of the reasons we do this podcast is to push the industrial sectors, not just mining, energy, um, transportation, construction. We focus on a lot of different sectors, but is to promote that and showcase the developments that are happening in these industrial sectors, and probably our demographic is tilted a little bit towards a younger demographic. So we're hoping we can get more involvement. You've had a lot of experience working with mines. What do you think right now is their biggest challenge in getting off the ground?
Capital.
That's it.
Capital. Because again, the capital that they're competing for now all of a sudden says, hey, if I can invest in Amazon or Apple or Facebook or Google, I can make twice as much money without the risk. Whereas if you're focusing on metals, you've got political risk, you've got environmental risk, you've got price risk. The all of a sudden the demand for the metal might drop through the floor,
Right.
or it might take off. But in the meantime, you've got just a lot more risks. So right now, the challenge is to find capital, simply because the capital that finds. Also, I have to emphasize, capital nowadays, because of the low yield curve. The yield curve has been essentially negative for the last 10 years. The capital also wants to see dividends
Yeah.
to satisfy the pensioners, because there are more pensioners in the marketplace than ever before. So all of a sudden, if you want dividends as well as low risk, boy, that's a challenge for a mining company.
Yeah. Is there any jumping? We'll jump back and forth between operating mines and mines that are trying to get started. What can mines do now that are operating? It's a two-part question. What can they do to what are they doing to try to lower their costs, and what can they do to gain public trust? Because that is something that's been challenged.
Well, that's a complex question.
Yeah.
Let's get into the cost reduction first. They definitely could start by buying used equipment and being more selective. And I know that the salesmen for the new equipment come up with all sorts of fancy offers and side gifts. But at the end of the day, you really, until you get that debt paid off or substantially paid down, you want to be as free cash flow as possible. Now, I use the term free cash flow carefully, because it's not a generally accepted accounting term, but it's a generally accepted banking term. You just want to service your capital and leave as much cash flow after servicing your capital as possible. And one of the ways is to definitely get involved in used mining equipment. Secondly, and I've just come back from the Atacama, people have to start now looking at solar energy. The Chinese have brought down the cost of solar dramatically. And if your mine is between 35 north and 35 south, you really have to give solar energy its due diligence. Thirdly, mines have to piggyback or share infrastructure. Now, I can show you a road to a mine, and I could keep track of the number of trucks that use that road, and I guarantee you that it will never be a percentage higher than 10%. So, given the fact that many mines are in mining regions, it really pays for the mining company to see if they could share infrastructure, be it road, be it telephony, be it power, be it anything. Just get that sharing process around, because that not only reduces costs, that also reduces the permits required, and that often reduces the manpower required as well. And that's like a triple policy. Unfortunately, we still have a lot of egos in the industry who would prefer to have their own road, but that's changing. And you're seeing with Goldcorp and Teck now in Chile, there is precisely this sharing analysis going on.
Is it also, and I ask this with no knowledge of it, is it also when you're getting permits and doing the mines, because they're separate, it's separate permitting for...
Oh, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why I said it's not only a cost reduction, but it's a permit reduction and a manpower reduction as well.
Right.
I mean, it's a triple benefit.
Right, yeah. And
Sorry, I
yeah.
actually had a question. You were mentioning that now, the industry has to compete with a lot of this new technology like
Yes.
Facebook and Google. Is there a way for the industry to work and use the new technology?
Oh, yes, of course. But at the end of the day, you still have metal price risk. You still have construction risk. You still have political risk. Google, unfortunately, is in Silicon Valley. It doesn't have political risk. Google can relocate, as we've just seen with the new European Union requirements. Google or Facebook can relocate 1.5 billion clients out of Ireland and into elsewhere, into more politically safe regions. Unfortunately, mining cannot do that. However, mining can take out EDC political risk insurance, or from the World Bank MEGA political risk insurance, and that can definitely reduce the political risk substantially.
How do mines gain more public trust? Going back to that, the second part of that question is, how do they do that? How do they start to attract the investors?
That's a great question. The answer to which is you've got to remember now that everybody is wired into the internet. Okay? The second some detractor does not like your answer, they can go into the net and you're a dead duck. So the solution is simple. First of all, hold public meetings once a year, let's say, with the general public. And everybody and anybody is allowed in and can voice their opinions. That lets you anticipate any issues that might be brewing. Secondly, you hire as many locals as possible. Leave the expats home. The locals, because it's their jobs, become your spy as opposed to a government spy. Thirdly, you want to basically get internally, you want to raise your community relations officer as high in the organization as possible. Often they are a manager that answers to the production department, which answers to a regional department, which ultimately answers to the COO or CEO. Get that plugged into the COO immediately so that the COO hears unequivocally what the complaints are or what the issues might be, so they can anticipate. So with those three elements, I'm not saying it's a guarantee, but I'm saying is that you can win yourself a lot more public trust.
Is it happening? Are you seeing
Yes,
companies starting to do it?
RTZ has done a wonderful job. BHP as well. The Canadians less so, I must say.
Yeah. Is it going to start? Do you think?
It
I mean,
has
they
to.
have to, right?
It has to. It has to.
And what's the most important relationship? Because there's the local communities, there's provincial. I'm talking specifically in Canada. And First Nations.
Everyone's on the net nowadays, and you just, I mean, there will always be issues, but at least you can anticipate them, and internally, they can reach the senior decision makers as quickly as possible.
Yeah, we had it was for technology that was sensor. So it was an iPad, and you take a picture of it, and it does all the sensory of what's in the materials.
Yes.
And he was talking about taking data. Data is one thing. At one time, it was all about how good the data is. Now it's moved into how fast can that data be communicated to the right area, and that's the primary, because we have data everywhere now.
Everyone's got data, yes.
Yeah. So, but data a week late, if it's going across a conveyor, or if it's going to communicate with the First Nations community, and it's too late.
That's why that mining company has just got to get information sessions going yearly, if not semi-annually, then at least yearly, to just hear what the local impressions are. And by the way, I can think of one example very clearly. It was the Lundin mine in DR Congo, and it turned out that them hiring a lot of locals, they not only sent the expats home, but the locals turned out to be far better spies on Kinshasa, which was the national capital, than any hired firm. Why? The locals basically liked to send their kids to the expat school, or to the expat staffed medical clinic.
I think it actually may have been you telling me a story once that there was a mine, and they.
Sorry, your mic.
Oh, sorry. You were. I don't know if it was you, but there was it was a very bad road. I think it was in Africa, and they ended up paving. It was quite a few kilometers, and they connected these two cities, and that mine invested, and I think they did put up a school, and they did other things in that community. And that mine, all the security issues and that, it eliminated so many of their issues because they made that investment into the community.
Well, I'll go back to a prior example, solar energy. One mine has basically invested in solar energy, and they have a little bit extra energy over and above their own needs. So they basically sold it for free or for cost to the nearby town. Women now have some power for their sewing machines, and they can do a little bit of seamstress or dressmaking. Kids can study at night, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, it's transformational. And all of a sudden, the political issues disappeared. Disappeared. And why? Because this mining company basically sold its excess power across the fence to the nearby town, and at cost. And all of a sudden, everybody said, well, my God, instead of waiting 2, 3, 4 years for the local utility to bring me electricity, this mining company is basically giving me electricity right away.
Yeah.
Again, it's an integrative model. You're no longer just a builder of a mine. You come in and you focus on your mine only. You have to reach out. You have to build a road, or you have to fix up a couple of bridges, or you have to bring in some expats into your medical clinic and into your schools, and perhaps share the schools and the medical clinic with the children of your employees.
Now we're talking about, if you're talking about markets where you can, there's that demand. Now, what can Canadian? What could? I mean, they're not the demand for a school electricity. That's not. So where can Canadian mining companies that want to mine here in Canada, what can they offer the public, or is it the jobs? Is that the?
It's the jobs. I mean, in Canada, we've got the schools, we've got the health system. What they can do better in Canada is pick up more of the infrastructure costs and of the environmental remediation costs. I don't think there is enough attention being paid yet to environmental remediation.
Just to focus on and that communication with
Oh, of course.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, just to sit down and once a year and you listen to people's gripes or listen to the issues firsthand and then have it travel to the senior most level of the mining company
That's going to
would
be key.
be a massive improvement.
Yeah. Well, thanks for taking the time. We appreciate you coming in and giving you've got a lot more information. And I don't want to cut you off. Are there other topics that you feel are
Yeah, first of all, you asked what it takes to get a mine going, and having been involved in this process recently, I'd have to say that the mining company has to present itself better as a lower risk to the investment community, and there are lots of ways doing that. First of all, you know, unfortunately, a lot of Vancouver promoters are still involved in flipping projects. So they go looking for money, but if we've got limited funds for mining, the last thing you want to do is get used by a flip, strategy. So first of all, you're going to have to present yourself as an ongoing concern, as an operating concern. Secondly, many investors now come armed with software that is current, and it's about as current as can be. So you're not going, they all know that everyone has cost overruns. So the important thing is to, when you approach the market, approach it once you've got the proven and probable figure up, and you still have some upside remaining. So that means that you can hang your hat on the proven and probable, and should there be cost overruns, well, there will probably be additional drilling coming up to mitigate that risk. And thirdly, people have to get used to the fact that permits can disappear in a femtosecond, which is 10 to the minus 15th. You have to look after your permits carefully. Don't assume that just because you got a permit, then all right, that's it. Sorry. Nowadays, especially if a new government comes in, everybody would love to conduct a review and everybody would love to pull permits. So just be absolutely certain that you are well within the upper bound or the lower bound of that permit. Because once you start wandering a little bit too close to one of those two bounds, you could be dead meat.
Yeah, and you think that's a major? Is that the major challenge in any region, or is that a Canadian?
No, it's a major challenge in any region. You're seeing many jurisdictions now in Central America ban Canadian mining or ban mining outright. And that was by and large because under a prior regime, the permit was obtained and then abused. So the new government comes in, needs a gringo to beat up on, and all of a sudden, there's somebody to be beat up on.
Which we support the industrial sector, but at the end of the day, that's the company's fault for not taking care of that.
At the end of the day, it's the company's fault, yes. And once that tube is out of the toothpaste tube, you can't get that toothpaste tube full again with any ease.
Yeah, you talked about used being a way to cut costs. What about, and you talked about solar, and I mean, how important is it for these mines to start integrating technology into their process? This German pavilion over here has companies that have a lot of technology. There's autonomous vehicles. You have Komatsu and Finning. They're showing off their equipment here. How important is that?
Massive.
Yeah.
It's again. Look, everyone knows that there are cycles. It's just that we've already seen a change from one cycle to a super cycle and then to a super drought. And nobody really knows what the future will bring. Yes, in 20 years' time, there will be 9 billion people on the face of this earth, half of whom will want to own cars. And 100 years ago, there was 1.5 billion people, and nobody owned cars. So, we are going into new demand cycles. But the bottom line is get your costs down. Absolutely get your costs down. Get your free cash flow up. Get those costs down any which way possible. Sharing infrastructure, solar energy, high technology, driverless trucks, if that can be imagined. But who knows what the future will bring?
And then communicate out with the public and allow the voice
shit,
to come in.
Yeah.
Yep.
And hire locally, hire and train locally as much as possible.
Yeah.
I just can't emphasize that enough.
Yeah.
There's still too many expats in this world. Yes, we've got a lot of engineers in Canada that would love to work elsewhere, but other countries are catching up as well.
Yeah.
And you don't have to be a rocket scientist to work at many mines.
Yeah.
And once you hire that local, believe me, you have the best local diplomat you can find.
Yeah. Absolutely. Thank you very much for joining me.
Not at all.